Welcome back, everybody. I hope you're all well and healthy. This week we're going to talk about biodigital devices just as we did last week, just really briefly, but more so in the context of privacy. Privacy is an interesting topic in that it really is something that's growing and ever changing. I want to start with a bit of a caveat. I know a number of you are cybersecurity majors. Some of this will be really basic for you, and I apologize for that, but you can understand how important it is if you're a true cybersecurity professional that everybody in your organization understands what their role and their context is in terms of privacy. So we're going to talk about privacy in the context of a security manager and then basically in the context of the physical security realm and physical security systems. So it's going to be very basic. Some of the definitions that I use may not be the same as those that cybersecurity people use, simply because we're talking about context. So just remember, maybe view this, if you are a cybersecurity major, as this is what others are using as their reference points, so you know where the other side is coming from, and it might help you in your planning and in your education programs for those in your organizations in the future. So what do we really mean by privacy in our context? Well, it's the expectation that information, primarily personally identifiable information, PII, and we'll talk a lot about PII, is kept safe and secure from people or entities not specifically authorized to receive such data by the owner. Okay, pretty simple. Personally identifiable information, which we will define in our context, you just have to keep it safe, and it's not, if it's not authorized by the owner to divulge, you don't divulge it. Well, who is the owner? We all own our own PII. Even when we allow others to use it for legitimate purpose, we own it. So my date of birth, if someone says, I call for service, they usually say, can you verify your address and your date of birth? I've given them permission to use my date of birth as an identifier so that nobody else could call and pretend to be me. But in the same token, I still own my date of birth. It's a piece of information that I own. So the owner is the one who actually has the PII that relates to them. As a security professional, you're going to collect PII in many instances. Investigations tend to be one that's really heavy in collecting a PII, but you don't own it. You hold it, and you must do so in a way that protects the owner's interest. Anytime you collect a personally identifiable piece of information, it is incumbent upon you to protect that information as if it were yours. But remember, you don't own the information that you hold if it's somebody else's PII. Very important. So let's go a little bit more into that spin of definitions. What exactly is PII? Well, it depends on who you ask. Okay, SOC 2 gives a very basic, and when you read the Braze article, you've already read that, I'm assuming, it's very basic. It could be your name, your date of birth, your address. HIPAA, which is the health information protections, it's your health information, your blood type, your medical history, your insurance information. GDPR, the General Data Privacy Requirements in Europe. It's a combination of any number of things that could make it possible for you to tell who a person is without actually knowing exactly who they are. And in the context of a security manager, look at it from this perspective. It's really a combination of information that if you could collect it together, you could pretty easily steal somebody's identity. And we all have some definition and some information around identity theft. You don't give out your social security number. You certainly don't give out your social security number in combination with your name and your date of birth. If you have those three pieces of information, you can pretty much apply for a credit card, right? I mean, I can get information online to see where all of you live and where you may have lived. It's pretty easy stuff in the public domain. Once you put that information together, you can put together a dossier which allows you to steal somebody's information and thus steal their identity and get to their finances and other things. So that's really what PII is. In general, it's any piece of information that could directly or indirectly identify a person. But that definition is really loose, right? I'd love to be able to say, here's the definition of PII, and it be, one good sentence that everybody uses universally, but that just ain't so. So a loose definition can be dangerous because you never know exactly whether or not you are protecting a piece of personally identifiable information, because there's always information in context, in combination with other things. So you always have to err on the side of caution when you're dealing with information generally. The other ones up above that I did not mention, FERPA, is the Federal Education Privacy Requirements. That's the requirement that Slippery Rock operates under. Privacy of your information as a student and your grades once you turn 18. And then the California Consumer Privacy Act is a new piece of legislation in the U.S., very much like the EU one, the GDPR, which protects consumer information in California, and I believe it to be the way of the future. So we'll talk about those. But just remember that any little piece of information about a person can be added to any other little piece of information, and it tends to grow. And next thing you know, you have enough information to truly become that person, at least online or in applications for things. And so all of that would be considered personally identifiable information. If used in aggregate, it could identify a person. So how does this impact somebody in physical security and security management? Well, in order to put information into access control systems, I will certainly put your name and a badge number. The badge number wouldn't really be a PII because it's not something that the average person can do anything with. But your name, and I might I might look at your driver's license, let's say, to make sure you are you when I put you in the system, right, for my own protection. And some security managers will put the driver's license number or passport number into their access control system and collect that piece of data to show that they indeed verify the identity of the person who came to see them. But any data that you collect for an access control system could be considered PII, and you have to look at it and really examine as to whether it might be. Data collected from investigations, absolutely. I have investigative files on people over the years that I have done that have, from that file, you could certainly steal this person's identity very easily. It would include previous arrest records. It would include credit checks. I had one investigative file that I did a few years back where the person applied for a mortgage loan and did so over a protected network where they were warned that anything they did became property of the company. But I had that information. It helped me put together a very good embezzlement case because I could see where their money was coming from because they had everything from their bank accounts, everything attached. And they could have easily stolen that person's identity. And all of that became evidence in the case that I turned over to law enforcement. And so I had the obligation to protect that information. It impacts you because you have to understand how data is released to persons other than the owner. So if you have a guard service, perhaps, that operates your access control head end, right? They're watching the alarms come in. They have access to the badge information. Well, now you have another person who is handling that owner information, right? That personally identifiable information. So you have some responsibilities on that. How is it protected from discovery or compromise? Certainly if you have the information on a computer screen and that computer screen is visible through a window or somebody looking over your shoulder easily, that data can easily be compromised, and you have responsibilities around not compromising that data. And data in some places, GDPR just came out with, in the last couple of months, their opinion on video footage. So what is in your video files could be personally protected information. And it can also mean entry and exit information, when a person came and went from work. The information that an access control system would collect could be part of PII because it could divulge other things, directly or indirectly, about a person. So as a security manager, what actions can you take to protect privacy? And they almost all lie in procedures, in pre-thinking what you're going to collect, how you're going to collect it, what you're going to do with it, and who's going to see it. So if you have a procedure and process to explain why you are collecting certain data, that will be helpful. If you have a policy on disclosure for workers that are touching that data and how they do their jobs around PII, that would be helpful. Understand the concept of single source of truth, okay, and using that to your advantage, and we'll go over what that means, works for you better too. And then have a clear reason why you need to hold any PII. Is it really needed to do your job every day? That really is one of the big questions you need to ask yourself. So let's go through each one of those. Let's talk about collecting data. And we're gonna pretend you're the security manager. You are sitting behind your computer. You have a new employee who comes in to see you, and you're going to get data from them so you can put it into your access control system so that you can put them in so that they can get in and out of your building. So first question to ask is, do you need to have a form for that? And so many security managers have a form for that. Fill out the form, give me your name, and used to be your social security number because that's what was used as a control number. Now it's usually the last four, which is permissible in all 50 states right now. That's why you use the last four of your social security number and never the whole number, because that is what's protected, is the whole number. But many ask for date of birth. Then you ask for what department they work in and what kind of car they drive. All kinds of questions, right? All kinds of questions that could potentially compromise that person's identity. But do you need to have a form? Because once you put it on a form, now that form itself becomes something that needs to be protected. It's not just now protecting your system, but now you have a piece of paper with all this information on it, and you must do something with that. So first order of business is, do you need to have a form to collect data? Before you decide to collect anything, do you need to have it all written down so you have one more piece of information that needs to be protected? Certainly, if you have a script to ask these questions and don't write it down, then you know if it gets compromised, it wasn't because of a form that you created. So creating another form just gives you another auditable record, and I would suggest that you, when you start to interview people, if you will, to get this information, you do it just that way. As an interview, you have a script, don't write it down, enter it directly into the system. Don't do it later. There should be a clear explanation about why the data is needed. Is it by law or is it to make the system work? Okay, so I will give you an example outside the U.S. I'm aware of 2 sites in India where the local law, which is by states, requires that there be a 24-hour access to a record that tells what an individual's blood type is and what their religion is. Now, you're probably rolling your eyes saying, oh my gosh, no one would ask, what's your religion and put it in an access control system. But in some cultures, whether or not how you are treated by responding medical personnel, what procedures they can and cannot do, is dictated by your religion, and they are well trained in that. And as a matter of respect for your religious preferences, that is recorded. And some places have decided the best place to put that is with security, who is there 24 hours a day, so let's put it in the access control system. By law, that needs to be available. That is where they decided to put it. Now, we'll talk about that in a minute when we talk about the single source of truth, but that is one option. But by law, they have to have this information available. That is why it's being collected. That is a reason for collecting the information. Is the information rather required to make the system work? So for the system to work, let's again go to an access control system. The only thing that's necessary to make it work is a badge and a badge number. It's nice if I can relate that to a person. So I put a name on it, so that makes it work better, and that makes some sense. But there's nothing in there that requires that I have your date of birth to make the system work. There's no age requirement on a badge, right? There's nothing that makes the system work because of that piece of information. So it's not required to make the system work. So I can't explain why I'm going to collect it, so why would I? But some security managers collect date of birth. They also collect license plate number. They use that in their parking enforcement. If they have a big facility where people park all over the place and shouldn't, they block fire lanes, you need to know who owns a vehicle. But is that necessary to make the system work? And if not, does it then belong in that system? So think about the data collected, whether it really is needed by law or whether it's necessary to make the system work. Think about how many steps are needed to collect the data. How many people have to touch it during data collection? If you go through a series of steps, your manager fills out a form that says you need an access card and they give you the information. Then you go to the security manager to have them sign off on it, and they ask you for more information and put it into a different format or different form. And then you go to the person who actually makes the badges and they ask you more questions. You've got a lot of steps and a lot of people who you have exposed that information to. It may be necessary to make the system work, or it may be required by law, but you've exposed it to too many people. So can you limit the exposure of that necessary data? And is there a way for owners to refuse to provide the data? If someone comes and you say, look, we use fingerprint readers on our main doors, I need to collect a sample of your fingerprints. and someone says, I'm not comfortable with that. That is personally identifiable information, and it absolutely is. A fingerprint, any biodigital marker is a personally identifiable information piece, simply because it is absolutely unique to that person, right? In the case of the Morpho Wave readers that we looked at, the fingerprint readers that we looked at last week, they also read a barcode, a QR code, or a regular badge. There are multiple technologies in those readers. In my own application, if someone says, I'm not comfortable giving you a fingerprint, that's okay. You will need to use your badge. And the system still works the same way. It's less convenient for them because they have to carry the badge with them everywhere they go if they forget it. If they come in on a cold day and it's under 27 layers of clothing in a pocket and they're standing outside, they'll have to pretty much open up their coat and get down in there and find that badge. But they certainly have the right to refuse to offer a digital marker. So one way to think about this in terms of workarounds is that I carry a couple of credit cards. Not really credit cards. I'm not a big credit card guy, but I have 2 company credit cards that I carry. And on the back of each one of them, there's a block for signature. I'm not comfortable signing those cards because I know that most servers in restaurants, clerks in hotels, people that I would use that card for, don't normally check another piece of ID to make sure that it matches the signature. They just flip it over, it's signed, and they move on, which means anybody can use the card. I'm not comfortable doing that way. So on the back of my cards, instead of signing it, I just put, please ask for ID. I write that with an indelible marker right on the back of the card. Perfectly legal. The clerk flips it over, sees that, says, sir, can I see your ID? They take it, they match the name on the credit card with my driver's license or passport, whatever I happen to be carrying, and then they're pretty comfortable that it's me, and they give me service. So that's a workaround for someone who refuses to sign the card, because if I drop it somewhere and I know the clerks aren't going to use it, then aren't going to check it rather, then it's probably going to get charges racked up if somebody uses it. And then I have to go through the hassle of getting them reversed or potentially paying at least the first $50, which is normally the case. So, that's a workaround. Think about the workarounds because that may be a savior for you as well. So then there's also policies for the collector of the data if it's not you. So again, I have at most of my facilities have a contracted security officer who does the badging, and they are the person who collects the data for me, be it biodigital or be it just information, right? So it is my responsibility as the security manager to make them aware of their responsibilities regarding protecting and safeguarding other people's data. I can't assume that they know, and if they make an error, I am still the one who is responsible for it, right? It is my system that is using the data, and therefore, and if the data gets compromised, as the system owner, I have problems that divulged a personally protected information owner's information, right? So you should have a policy for your collectors, anyone who will collect data on your behalf to make your systems go. They should understand when the data can be released, to whom it can be released. So it is not unusual, and something that you all should prepare yourself for is on a Friday afternoon, you will have managers of hourly employees who will call you as the security manager and say, hey, I need a printout of the, when everybody came and left in my department. Because they're using that in lieu of time cards. They're using it to check their time cards. They don't trust their people. When a manager calls and says, I need to know what time Johnny came in the morning, the answer to that, quite frankly, and I'll use my answer, you may have to be a little bit more delicate in your early years with the company, but I say, I got a better idea. Why don't you get out of bed early and sit at Johnny's desk and wait for him to come in, and when he's late, ask him where he's been. So you have to understand that people will ask you for that, and they will ask you for all kinds of information on other people. You need a policy that says we will release data from our systems, be they video systems, access systems, alarm systems, any security system that you own, any investigative files that you have. Now, this isn't the investigations course, but you need to understand that others will ask you for it. HR people will say, send me your investigative file on this person. I need to know everything you got on this person. Send me all your stuff. you can't necessarily do that because you are releasing personally identifiable information. You may need to redact that information. You may need to get clearance from the owner of that information, which is truly bizarre that you need to ask the person who was investigated it if you can release their results of your investigation to HR. But that indeed is one way that you would have to do it if they needed all of that information. You can't necessarily share information that's not already in the hands of someone with them unless there's a valid reason, or you have the owner approval, which is the other way. You can get an owner to acknowledge when they give you the information. This may be a form that's beneficial to say, I've given certain information to the security department for their use. I understand that this may be released to others internally at the company for other purposes. Externally, not a chance anybody's going to sign that, nor would you ever want to get yourself in that quagmire, but you may need to turn over things internally, and you want their pre-approval for that. And then you probably want to think about non-disclosure agreements when it comes to contracted people. If you have contracted people who provide services to you, and one of those services includes collecting personally identifiable information, you should have a non-disclosure agreement in your contract that says just that. They will not disclose information gathered in the course of their contract to others without your permission. That indeed gives you at least some legal protection when and if they do release information. The big thing is, though, to understand ahead of time when you collect information who may ask for it and what your answer is going to be. You have to anticipate those questions and have your policies set up so that you understand when someone asks for information, whether or not you can divulge it or what they may need to do to get permission to get that information. There's also the concept of single source of truth. And I don't know whether or not you may have covered this in computer science courses, whether it's a common term. It's one that is more and more used across industry. And really, the single source of truth describes the one system that's designed to hold a piece of information and is constantly accurate. Okay? And bottom line is, you don't need to be the single source of truth for anything other than the data that your system generates, right? So if you think about it, license plates. If you ask people to provide their license plate number for something, why would you need to do that? You can, in most states, get an agreement with the state to pay a fee to send in a license plate number, and they will give you the name of the owner of that vehicle. It's expensive, and it requires a bond usually that you file with the state, but most states will sell you that information. The single source of truth then becomes the state, the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles. I don't know what you call it in Pennsylvania. It might be DMV. We call it the Secretary of State here in Michigan. They are the ones who keep track of license plate numbers. And when they get changed, I just changed a month or so ago the one on my own truck because it was rusted. They were used a bad paint job on some years of making license plates in the prison system, and they wore out. They said anybody who had this style of license plate needed to get a new one, and it had a lot of surface rust. I got a new one, and obviously I got a new number. If I had given that to my security manager at my place of employment, they would have the old number, and it's unlikely that I would go in and give them the new one. So now you have a piece of information that's not going to be updated because you are not the source of truth on this. The Department of Motor Vehicles is, and so they have the accurate information. You do not. Health info, physical exam records, the whole idea of the blood type I talked about. Could we not give the guards access to certain portions of medical records, right, under a non-disclosure agreement, and tell them if you need to understand someone's blood type, you go here. And the reason being is that the blood type that was given in the security interview may not be correct. If they had a physical exam and a blood sample was taken, their blood was typed as part of the physical exam, and they are B positive, they may go into the interview and they say, what's your blood type? A lot of people, I don't know if everybody in the class knows their blood type. I know mine because it was on my dog tags from the military, right? But most people really don't know their blood type, and they're going to take a guess at it, or they're going to say, I don't know, and you're going to take a guess at it. There's going to be an error in collecting of that information when the source of truth, being a medical record, would tell you that. Same with height and weight. I know security managers who put height and weight and description of a person in their access control system. Why they do it, I don't know, but they do. If you are not the source of truth for this information, if you are not the first person, if you're not the issuer, the generator of that information, then you can get it from someone else. Don't put it in your systems. Go to the single source of truth whenever you can. You can even take a feed from that into your system, quite frankly. But don't be the secondary source of anything in your system. If the information is absolutely correct and updated in another system, get access to that and look there for that information when you need it. Don't try to put it into your access control system, because you're going to make a mistake with it. It's not going to be correct, and it's probably going to get released and released wrong at some point, which is actually potentially going to do someone harm. So really, as a security manager, when you collect information and you release information, personally identifiable information, PII, which you will have in your possession, justification is really the key. Can you clearly, definitively express why you're collecting the data? Do I need this data to do my job? Do I need it to make my systems work? Or am I just collecting it because I think it's nice to know and it might help me down the road somewhere, and I don't know why I'm really collecting it today, but I could use it later? Like a license plate number, like blood types, like dates of birth. They're not necessary to make your systems work, and they're not necessary for you to do your job every day. You shouldn't be collecting them. If you can't explain it simply, clearly, and show it's absolutely necessary, simply don't collect it. If indeed you have an access control system that has a block and a user-defined field, if you will, in your database where you're putting in the name and information, you're registering somebody, you take over an access control system. Now the first person comes and says, I like a badge, and you go in there and you say, okay, I need all this information. I'm filling in these blocks. They're already pre-programmed for you. And if one of them looks problematic, like, why do I need that? It doesn't make the system work. It's not information that I need every day to do my job. Then it is incumbent upon you to get someone to come in and block that out and take it out of the system and delete that data and get rid of it. Because you shouldn't collect anything that's not absolutely necessary. And there's fallout to doing that. So just about every government program and every government around the world has privacy programs in place. The GDPR, the General Data Privacy Requirements in the EU, were really the pinnacle of this. A few years ago, when they unveiled these, they were very stringent. It applies to EU citizens outside the EU too. So if you're an EU citizen and you're in the US, your data privacy rights extend. And it applies to companies globally if they do business in the EU. My own company has simply decided that we're going to act like a European company when it comes to data privacy and follow the GDPR, even if it is a Nebraska resident in the state of Iowa. They will be treated as if they were a European citizen when it comes to their data. One of the big things in GDPR is the right to be forgotten. And if I have information in one of your systems and I leave the company, or I no longer do business with the company, I have the right to send you a note to say, I wish to be forgotten. And that means you need to permanently delete those records that are not required by law out of the system so that person is indeed forgotten. There are some exceptions to that, obviously. If you had access to certain information, if there are clearances, things like that, there are government requirements, but they are few and far between. A person has the right to be forgotten by a system, and you must erase that. If not, the fines are very high. I believe it is as high as 20 million British pounds, which today is somewhere around, I think, the 15% difference or so. So we're looking at somewhere around $24 million in potential fines. And it's actually calculated on a percentage of your gross global revenues, and no higher than 25 million or so. But like I said, it's 20 million pounds sterling right now. And you just don't want to pay a fine like that. The HIPAA regulations protect your health and insurance info. You will certainly get sued if you divulge that. Why is that important? Well, if I go to the doctor and I tell the doctor that I have symptoms of HIV, and the doctor does a test and indeed says I have HIV and puts it in my file, I am not required to divulge that to my employer. And if my employer were to ask that question, they may make a decision that I'm going to be too expensive to insure in future years because I'm going to likely have increased medical costs, if nothing, the cost of treatment of my HIV. And so they may decide to to let me go in a layoff because I'm going to be an expensive proposition because of my medical conditions. Therefore, that is protected information, as it should be. And if you work in the medical field, and even if you don't, the entry-exit data on a person may be indicative of the fact that they take a lot of time off for medical purposes. You have to be very careful with any piece of information that can be construed in a way that could potentially or indirectly identify a person as having a medical condition. FERPA, it protects students and your families. It's why once you turn 18, even though if your mom or dad are paying for your tuition, they can't call me and ask me how you're doing in the class. If you're over 18, FERPA prevents me from talking to your parents about your status in the class. And in fact, it prevents me really from calling your parents for just about anything unless it's an absolute emergency and I need to document why I did it. And with an online class, it's very unlikely that I would need to do it. But if you have information on a student, which I do, your grades are indeed personally identifiable information under FERPA. And then there's the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is brand new, really mirrors the general data privacy requirements, the GDPR we talked about above, but it's a California law. And it includes the right to be forgotten and is really the model, I believe, for the future. And I think we will see states start to adopt this, and eventually there'll be a general data privacy requirement in the U.S. where people have more rights over their data, the things that they generate, the things that are personal about them. And a lot of this has to do with consumer, where you go on the internet, the things they collect from cookies when you're cruising around the internet, right? That really eventually could be used to identify you, and that becomes your personally identifiable information. And the CCPA is California's attempt to really start to get a handle on that, and I believe other states will do it as well. The big issue here is, guys, if you violate and divulge someone's PII, you'll be subject to very, very healthy fines. So will your company. It's unlikely that you'll keep your job. It's something you have to be cognizant of. And as we talk about biodigital devices, you are collecting PII in almost every single case. Even when you just put in records into a standard access control system, which is why I wanted to take the time this week to really talk about the privacy in general, because it's really information that you are collecting that now you have responsibility for, and you have to understand what those responsibilities are. So again, very generally, the takeaways to the cybersecurity people in the class, you're looking at saying, oh, there's a lot more to it than that, or maybe I even got something wrong, but remember the context that I'm looking at is different than yours. But understand that data, primarily PII, has an owner, and that's the person it applies to. And unless it applies to you, that's not you. You don't own the personally identifiable information that you collect from somebody. They are allowing you to use it. And you have a responsibility to protect it from compromise, from being used. And if you don't do that, there's a lot of laws in place that will come back to haunt you. Those who are touching the data to do their job have to know their responsibilities. And in many cases, as a security manager, those people will report to you or through a contract to you. And you need perhaps an NDA and certainly a policy that tells them what they need to do with that information, how they need to protect it, and who they can release that data to. The big takeaway is if you don't need to collect a piece of information to make your systems work, to do your job every day, then don't collect it. Simply don't collect the information. Look at the information you were asking for in your systems and in your security role and ask, do I really need this? Or can I go get it someplace else that probably has it more up to date and is better data anyway? Just be fully justified when you ask and store data. If it's not 100% necessary, it's suspect, and you should probably consider not taking on responsibility for someone else's data. I'd like to switch gears just a bit and talk a little bit about the projects and a little bit about the next couple of weeks. The midterms are taking some time. As some of you know, I haven't been feeling all that well, at least right after midterms. In fact, during midterm week, I went to work with a colleague who had returned from the UK, and he and I shared an office for a couple of days, and at which time he told me that he hadn't been feeling well when he came back from the UK. And sure enough, same thing happened to me. same symptoms of fever, chills, body aches, cough, shortness of breath. In the state of Michigan, tests are now in full swing, but weren't back then, weren't available. And so I did, I think, the right thing and was not tested, but I'm pretty sure I know what I had. But feeling a little better now and getting back in the swing of things. The midterms then are taking some time, but also they're taking time because I really want to look these things over and understand everybody's thinking. When you get your midterm grades back, which hopefully will be before you see this lecture, if not within 24 hours of seeing this lecture, I'm sure you'll have them because I'm just about done with releasing them. You'll notice that I made some comments on them. And even if you got 100%, which many did on the midterm, I still made a few minor comments, a few considerations for change. And that is because there is no hard and fast rule, especially on things like lock sets. You may want to put an office lock set in and not a privacy, and I would say, I'd put a privacy there. I'm thinking about the fact that a privacy is a little cheaper and I don't necessarily have to issue keys. That may be an easier fix, but doesn't mean that an office lock set is a wrong choice for that door. There are some obvious wrong choices. If you have a executive office with a file room inside of it and you put a passage set on the executive office, I would probably tell you that's not the way to go. But I made some suggested changes. Consider those. You're not required, unless, I pretty much pointed that out on some, but you're not required to do those changes, but consider them and think about whether or not it might just be a little bit more consistent change if you do it the way that I suggested. Okay? Need you to use a simple spreadsheet like Excel. In fact, please use Excel because it is part of the Office suite that's available to you through the college to list your components and your cost. And I will show you an example of that as we go forward. Don't try to reuse your midterm drawing, okay, and add things to it as we go into the cameras and those things. Make a clean copy, please. Mainly because you've made markups on those. We're going to have to talk about pictures versus scanning. But I'd like you to do a full clean copy with all changes. Don't try to do erasures and things like that. It will really look bad and it'll be hard for me to read. So I really insist that you do another clean copy when you make your final edits. I didn't include prices on that budget list for the PTZ cameras. I didn't include them for recorders. If indeed you decide that you don't want to do onboard recording of a camera, which is one of the choices you can make as a security manager, I will let you know the cost of recorders. Imagine that they're going to be somewhere around, let's see, if you're looking at a 4-camera system, 5-camera, 6-camera even, let's go up to 8. You're looking probably at about $4,000 for a decent NVR. But I'll put that in writing for you. PTZ cameras, the prices are in the Access Communications price list, the cheat sheet that I sent you, so you can get the prices for those there. But I didn't list them because they're in that book. I don't know that I would use any PTZ cameras on this project, but again, this is your project, not mine, and it's your budget. So let your conscience be your guide, but the prices for those are in that cheat sheet. So some of the things that I saw on the midterm projects, on the initial submissions, which were not necessarily wrong, but think about keeping it simple. Okay, you know about biodigital devices, and I thought it was important for you to understand that because you are going to use them in your careers. Remember in the beginning I said we're going to really gear this course toward being able to talk the talk when you go into your first job, right? No one wants to go in nervous about things, so you need a little exposure to this stuff. But even though you know about it, are they really required for this project? I don't know that I would use much biodigital on a small warehouse. If it were part of a larger campus where it needed more protection because there'd be a lot more activity going around, then I might consider that. I don't know if I would. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but think about keeping it simple. Anytime you try to throw too many laser beams at something, you should start to scratch your head and say, am I making this so complex? And the reason is that it's the cost of ownership. We've talked about cost of ownership before. The more complex you make something, the more it's going to cost you to fix it, right? A BMW is a pretty complex automobile. It has all kinds of great things going on under the hood. But when you take one to a mechanic, it's not the same as taking your Chevy Cruze. Okay, it's going to cost you more. So complexity adds to the cost of ownership, and a BMW owner takes that into account when they buy one. But in this case, do we need the BMW or will the Cruze work for us, right? A simple, solid, basic program always does better than a complex one. That just goes without saying, and anytime you can make something work simply and elegantly, it is much better than making, the better mousetrap. Less is more in these projects, right? If you can protect that building with the basics, use the basics. So when the project comes due, and we still have some time, you don't need to worry about it. You're going to have plenty of time to do it. And we're going to have a workshop week, so at least one. So don't worry about that. But you'll submit a fresh drawing that will include all of the readers, all of the alarm points and the intrusion detection points, the VSS system, the lighting, and the lock sets at a minimum. Okay. We'll have a spreadsheet with the cost for all the components to make sure you make your budget. And then an updated scope document, which you've been working on, the one that you left the things in red on, your scope document. Make sure that when you make changes, some that I may have suggested on your midterm, some that you may just decide to do because your budget is getting tight. When you make changes, you're going to need to change that in the scope document. Make sure your scope document and your drawing match. What you're saying in one, you're saying in the other. One of the things that was a bit of a difficult thing for me were the pictures of the drawings. I really wanted everybody to scan them in rather than to take a photograph. The photographs just don't come through very good, gang. It's very hard to understand what you did, and I think I had a lot more questions, and it's very much slowing me down when people took pictures, and especially if those pictures were attached to a Word document. So we've got to make some changes because not everybody has access to a scanner at home now. Right? And most of you are working from home, just like I am. So I will accept pictures. However, they cannot be on a Word document. They must be in a JPEG. So between now and the end of the semester, you have everything you need to know to learn, I'm sure, on the internet, how to make sure that your cell phone or camera that you're going to use is going to take a JPEG and convert it so that I can look at those pictures. The ones on the Word documents, the different versions of Word, do it differently, and some of them I opened up, and then I had to open up a third program. Then I had to copy it down to a Word document myself. It was a bit of a chore. I was taking about 30 minutes, and also anytime I need to download these rather than look at them through D2L, I have to download them to my laptop and to my cloud. And yesterday I did a cleanup, and just from the last class that I did where people sent pictures in, I think I got rid of about 4 gigs worth of pictures and files that were pictures for instead of scans. So, I'm trying to avoid that as well, right? To jam up and slow down my laptop. But I do need to accept pictures going forward, right, for these things, because not everybody's got a scanner at home. I get that. But please don't attach them to a Word document. Keep them in the native JPEG format so that I can view them. Make sure any pictures you take are well lit and the paper's flat and it's clean. That was the other issue I had with some of the pictures. Drawings are meant to be rolled, right? Drawings go in a roller when you do official drawings, right? So that you don't put folds in them. And some of you had obviously rolled the drawings, which is not a bad practice, except for if you're going to take a picture of it, because the things rolled over and shadows were on them. It was kind of hard to see. So they need to be flat, clean, well lit. If you're going to take pictures in a JPEG format, that should get us through for the projects. We'll have more on the projects coming up, so you don't need to worry about them right now. But if you have questions, you certainly know where to get a hold of me. So this week, you have some reading. There are 2 articles. You'll read both of them before you do the lecture, and then I would suggest you go back and read those 2 again. They'll make more sense. It's almost like if you go into the lecture without any background in some of these privacy laws, then it's confusing. And once you're done with the lecture, if you read them, it'll be less confusing. So you may want to read them twice. They're not long. They're 5-minute reads, really, so it's not a heavy lift. The Baker and Benny text, pages 186 to 197, is the continuation and the finishing up on the biodigital. They call them biometric devices. It also talks a little bit about privacy, but it kind of talks you through the registration process on some of these. The lecture now is done. You did that. Check that box. Good job. There is a quiz. It's due on Sunday at midnight, 11:59 p.m. actually. I don't make it midnight because it confuses people on what midnight I'm talking about. So it's 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, Eastern Daylight Time. Don't forget to do the quiz. It will be equally on the last week's biodigital and this week's privacy. So make sure that you have your notes from both. Then start to work on the project. Again, start to put budget number around the things that you have on there now so you know where you stand already. Most of you will be a pretty pretty good footing. Many of the designs were very basic, and I think most of those people are going to come in probably, with the $10,000 that you have to have for the head end, right? Because you have to have a head end on the system. So that's automatically, you think I set the budget at 55,000. Well, you say, wow, that's a lot of money. Well, it's already 45 because you have to spend 10 right out of the chute without anything else to have a head end. I think most of you are going to come in probably around 20,000 before you do your cameras, and that's a pretty good place to be. In fact, you may even be more favorable or a little less favorable, and you still be in a good shape. Just remember that on the projects, there will be some changes to the budget. There always are. There's something called a value engineering exercise that goes on with every major building project, where they go through and they say, okay, what do we need? And somebody always forgot to ask for something up front, and so they need to shift funds, and they will shift them away from other people's stuff, and everybody takes a bite. So be prepared for your budget to go down. You're working toward 55,000 now. There could be a small and or significant cut to that budget, so keep your powder dry, as they say. Next week we talk about procedures. We were going to do 2 weeks on procedures because we had the exercise where we reached out and worked with security professionals in the field. Really love that exercise, but guys, these people are so busy right now, and they're all working from home. We're all going to have bandwidth issues here coming up, and so we're going to do a project review on that second week rather than continue with procedures. I think we'll do procedures in 1 week. Maybe we'll do the tail end of it the next week in the lecture, but then we'll do a project review, kind of go over some things. Still looking to see if I can do a couple of live phone calls, WebExes or something, but again, bandwidth is going to be something very hard to get your hands on with everybody in the world working from home. I've already noticed mine is slowing down, and I need to know if any of you are having connectivity issues. Please call me, text me to let me know that you're having issues so we can work through those. There may be other ways for you to get your assignments to me rather than through the system that are still legal by SRU standards. More than willing to work with anybody. Heck, if we have to go by mail and put it in an envelope, we'll get it done. But I need to know if you have connectivity issues. Okay? With that, can everybody just have a great week? Get outside. Be safe. Get outside, take a walk, ride your bike, whatever. Practice good social distancing. Do your part. Everybody's in that age group where there's a less likelihood that you're going to get contaminated, but as much likelihood as you're going to contaminate someone else. So don't be a carrier, right? Do your part. Have a great week. I'm here if you need me. My email is back up and running as of, midday Saturday. So no impediments to contact me now. So have a great week, and we will see you next week.